warm welcome to Faith Over Fear, the Pediatric Epilepsy Podcast, a place to have an open conversation with warrior parents and the country's most notable experts on epilepsy, one of the most devastating neurological diseases. We'll talk about urgency, mental health, and this will be a place where we can have positive stories and even devastating, heart-wrenching ones to inform, invite, and inspire. We'll be hosting 2 podcasts a month, and they'll include parents, epileptologists, mental health experts, caregivers, and more. I'm Christy Grease, founder and CEO of Mickie's Miracles, a nonprofit organization dedicated to global pediatric epilepsy awareness, education, and advocacy. I'd like to introduce our executive director, Dario Herrera. Welcome.
Thank you, Christy.
And we're so excited for our inaugural podcast to have with us an incredible woman, mama bear, and warrior, Kelsey Hau. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, when Dario and I were talking about this podcast and who would be the first person, I have chill bumpies right now because you were foremost in our mind. Not only your story of resiliency and heartbreak, quite frankly, but how you are an overcomer, you're a warrior, you're resilient, and you're articulate. We're honored that you've joined the Mickie's Miracles family, not only as a blogger on our Mickie's Miracle website, but in addition, we're so excited for more content to come from you. You have a lot of different areas that you're passionate about. You have so much to contribute. Also, we're excited to very soon have you be the chairman of our new parent advisory board. And we just can't wait to see what comes of all this and how you can take your story and pass it on to the families of Mickie's Miracles. So I would just love to start with you telling your story. We met a few years ago and connected over Instagram, I believe, and you just touched my heart. And we've kind of been on this journey, and I remember after some stuff that happened with you, I said, hey, listen, reach out to me when you're in a place that you can share. And so I would just love for you to share your story with our audience.
Yeah, definitely. So I got connected to Mickie's Miracles when I was kind of in, the worst days of my life. My son had just been diagnosed with infantile spasms, and I knew nothing about it. I knew when I was pregnant that Asher, my son, was going to have some difficulties. We knew his brain had kind of developed abnormally, but we weren't sure what that was going to look like. So, when they first brought up infantile spasms to me, I was just kind of like, what is this? And why is nobody talking about this? And in my first Google search of like, what the heck do I do now? Mickie's Miracles came up, and you guys, you were just a light in a really dark time in my life. So my son Asher was born in September of 2017. Like I said, during my pregnancy, we realized that his brain had developed a little bit abnormally. He had a couple other challenges. So, we did all of the genetic testing. We weren't able to find any genetic markers that were going to, kind of steer us on how his life was going to be. So it was really just a lot of unknown. They induced me early because at that point they knew that, we could do more for him here on Earth than, when he was Earthside versus, in my belly. So they induced me early. We found out pretty immediately that he had something called agenesis of the corpus callosum. So that basically means that he was missing the part of the brain that helped the left and the right hemispheres communicate with each other.
Okay.
So for some people, they have ACC and they can live an entire life and have no idea. There's these stories of people who get in a car accident at 55 years old and, they're doing an MRI and the doctor's like, hey, did you know you're missing like a pretty good chunk of your brain? But the brain, is magical, and sometimes it just kind of, adjusts to what it's used to, and people have a pretty normal life. And then there's children that are on the more severe end of the spectrum, and it becomes very life-limiting for them. So at first we weren't really sure what to expect, but we knew pretty early on that Asher was going to be on the more severe end of the spectrum, and this was going to limit his lifetime with us. I took him home from the NICU eventually, and we kind of had a pretty easy start until about the 4-month mark. And when he started having his seizures, we didn't see them clinically at first. We just saw a huge digression in what he was doing. He stopped eating, he stopped communicating with us. We could tell that he wasn't really tracking anymore. He wasn't engaging with anyone.
Did they tell you to expect the seizures?
They didn't. They said it was an option. It's something that could happen, but when we were in the NICU, we were fortunately at a very great hospital, but it was just so unknown that no one really gave me like, hey, this is what you should expect to see. So when they said, seizures might be something that we see in the future, I'm expecting like the seizures that we see on TV, like the full on shaking. Yes, like that. I mean, that's at that time as a new mom, that was the only thing that I associated seizures with, which is just very much not the case in pediatric epilepsy usually. So,
and Kelsey, what's going through? I mean, you just had a baby, right? And you just got
your
this
first baby, right?
Gift, right? You've been blessed with this beautiful baby boy, and then you hear that, and then you have to transition from the hospital to home, and you have all this uncertainty around that. Walk us through a little bit. What are you feeling like? What's the experience like? How did you cope with that?
Yeah, luckily I have a very large family, and they, kind of from day one, when we got that diagnosis in the hospital, they were like, we're doing this together. Like, you will never be alone. I was a single parent, and I actually became a single parent the day that I gave birth to my son. So I had expected to have a partner to do this with. And they gave us all of these diagnoses. They let us know what his life was going to look like. And my partner at the time wasn't cut out for being the parent of a sick child. So I had a baby. They told me he was really sick. I became single, and then they sent me home, and they were like, "Good luck." So it was a whirlwind. Like I said, some of the darkest days of my life, but also some of the brightest, because I watched our community, and I watched my family, and I watched so many people across the country hear Asher's story and reach out to me. And I'm sorry, this dog is going to keep jumping in my lap.
Perfect. We don't mind at all.
I watched everyone rally behind us, and it was very much like, whatever you need to do, if it's a cause of like, you don't have the funds to do this, we're going to do a fundraiser. I worked for a great organization that was like, work from home, adjust your hours, do what you need to do. Amazing. So that you never have to choose like your job over being a mom. So we were really lucky in that sense. And we kind of went home, knowing that Asher was going to be on the more severe end of the spectrum. My goal was always, to give him the best life that he could have in his short amount of time. And I worked with a team at the hospital that really helped us define what that was going to look like at the beginning of his life. And then was there to remind me of that throughout our entire 2 years, which really kind of, changed the game for us, because, when he was diagnosed with infantile spasms, there's a lot of things that you can do for it. There's a lot of things that work. There's a lot of things that don't work. And like, Christy, a lot of times they're like, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. You're switching around all of the time. And we kind of got to the point where they were like, we can keep trying this, Kelsey. We will fight until you are done fighting. But you told us at the very beginning that we were looking at quality of life. We know Asher is not going to live a long life. We know he's not going to recover from this. So they just always made sure that I had that lens, because they knew it was important to me. And when you're watching your kids struggle, it's so easy to get wrapped up in like, okay, what can we do? And, and we got to the point where we were doing more harm than good, when we were, pumping his little body full of every single drug imaginable. And my team, when we got towards the end, my team just kind of sat me down and were like, okay, like, let's go back to our initial conversation. Let's talk about quality of life. Where are we going to go from here? Because, they were going to support me either way, but they really just kind of helped me, go back to my roots and remember like what we wanted when we started this journey for Asher. And, we were able to give it to him once we got towards the end of his life. He, with his pediatric epilepsy, we had we had several stretches of really good, really healthy Asher. And we were able to fit a lot into those little stretches. I got to take him to Disney. We spent a lot of time out at my family's lake house. He loved being outside. He loved being in the water. So, when the seizures were controlled, he had a really good life. And towards the end, when we knew that, this was probably the end, he sat down with the team. They said, all right, take him home. We're going to keep him comfortable, do whatever you can, keep him for, and we just went home. We got to be mom and baby, and our whole family got to come in and see him. And he got to pass very peacefully at home, like with everyone who loved him. So exactly the way that I wanted it at the beginning. When they tell you, here's this new baby, figure out how to mother him, and then figure out how to say goodbye. It's like the most overwhelming thing in the world. Like, how can you possibly hand me this tiny bundle of joy and tell me that I'm not going to get to keep him? There's going to come a day, probably sooner rather than later, that you're going to have to say goodbye to him. But, it was important for me to do that at home with our family. And luckily, Children's and our neurology team helped us keep them for as long as possible healthy. And then they helped us say goodbye when it was time to do that.
I can't imagine that. I can't even imagine the difficulty of, first, the realization that you have limited time, right? And then knowing that time's going to come probably sooner versus later. And when I first heard this, I mean, I was devastated for you. And through that devastation, though, I felt and could experience your bravery and your courageousness and your love for him. That's something that came across so just beautifully and so profoundly. And, as a dad of 3 children, I connected to that, very at a very deep level. So, I have to just say, like, you're so brave and so courageous, and your grace through all of this has been such a source of inspiration. And I love for you to talk about that because, this is a hard thing, obviously. Mm-hmm. The heart of a parent, it's not even imaginable for me. Right.
Right.
And yet the grace you carried yourself with, and how you held your head high, and you counted those blessings every day, and you gave Asher the best quality of life you could have, and a mom's love. I'd love to hear how you're able to do that. That's just incredible. I mean, nothing short of incredible, really.
Well, thank you. But, I always say I learned from the best. That little boy in his tiny, broken body showed me what real strength was. And he showed me what it's like to get up every day and just fight and just do what you can to get through the day. We had this sign in our home that when he was with me that said, I remember the days I prayed for the things I have now. And it's so easy when you're in the thick of it to be like, why is this happening to me? Like, what did I do to deserve this? What did Asher do to deserve this? Why is our life so hard when, you're looking at all of these other mothers bring healthy, lively babies into the world? And it's really easy to be like, why us? And that sign was just the reminder, like, I prayed for that baby. Mm-hmm. And it's not the life that I thought I was going to get to have with him, but it's the life that I prayed for. And he came into this world and he opened the eyes of so many people. And it is such a blessing to get to be a mom of someone that has transformed so many lives and wasn't even with us for 2 years. His life was so short, but it was so big. And, we're coming up on 2 years since him passing, and I still have people reaching out to me that have just heard his story and tell me just how inspired they are. And to get to be a mom of a baby who got to do that is just like the biggest blessing, the biggest joy. I am so proud every day to call him my kid. And we couldn't have done it without my family. There is not a single day that goes by that I know that I would not have been able to be the mom that I was to Asher, or the person that I am today, without my parents and my sisters and our entire extended family, holding my hand and saying, we're going to do this together. And I don't care what it looks like, we're going to do it and we're going to make it work. And, in the days after Asher died, when I just didn't even want to exist anymore, they were the ones knocking on my door saying, we're getting out of bed, we're going for a walk. Even if that means we're going to sit at the cemetery all day, we're doing it, because that is what we were asked to do. And it sucks. And this journey sucks sometimes. But I have to believe that this little boy was brought to this world to change so many minds and lives in the 2 years. And, now it's my job to continue to make sure that that story continues, and that people still know Asher's story, and that he, as a mom who's lost a baby, one of the biggest fears is that the world is going to forget. And I'm a pretty young mom and a single mom. So like now I just moved to Chicago and nobody in Chicago knows me as a mom. It's like, that's not even a natural question to ask. Like, oh, do you have children? Because I am so young. And it's my job to be like, yeah, I am a mom and I had the best kid. And his story is not over. And so I will continue to share it. When he was first diagnosed, like I said, I was kind of like craving any information I could get. I wanted the stories. I wanted to hear the moms. I wanted to hear the good, the bad, the ugly. Like, I wanted to know what I was in store for. And it's something that just really isn't talked about a lot. So I made that decision then that I was going to be very open with my story about Asher. I was going to share all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly. I shared the good days. I shared our Disney trip. And then I shared the day that I signed a DNR and chose to move him into hospice, which is just, the darkest day, like even darker than him dying. Because by the time he died, I just wanted him to be, I wanted him to be pain-free. I was ready for him to go, because at that point he was struggling so much. But making that choice, having to actually sign that DNR, was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. And nobody talks about it, it just, it doesn't happen. And so I made the choice pretty early on that I was going to live our life out loud, so that, in 10 years, if a mom is standing in my shoes, she has something to cling to. Obviously our story didn't end positively, but I like to think that, it still gives people a little bit of hope that, even if your story ends in the worst way imaginable, it doesn't end. It's just, it's just a new chapter. It's a new part of my life, one that I never really asked for, but has been really rewarding in and of itself. Like I said, getting to be a mom to a kid who has been gone for 2 years and people are still talking about is just the greatest blessing.
Yeah, you wrote a beautiful article about how you turn pain into purpose, and it's for anyone who wants to read it, it's on our blog at mickiesmiracles.org. And the strength to be able to, turn that pain into, and the selflessness, really, the absolute selflessness, that decision, that conscious decision to turn your pain into, a purpose for serving others, inspiring others, teaching others, giving others hope, empathizing with others, letting them know they're not alone. I mean, that's a big transition from grieving mom to, advocate at the highest possible level, right? And being a source of learning for so many people. Tell us a little bit about how you made that kind of transition. And I know you're still making the transition, and that probably will be part of your life's work, I'm guessing. But I'd like to know more about how that happened, and where are you today?
Yeah, so Christy, like she said, she sent me a message in the weeks following Asher's death and said, when you're ready to talk, I have a platform for you. Like, I have a way that you can reach a lot of moms and you can help. And at that time I was so deep in the grief that I just, I was in survival mode. I needed to just get through the day. And I wasn't really ready to talk about it. And grief is very selfish. So my first year, I just took the time to myself. And sometimes that looked like getting out of bed and doing absolutely nothing but sitting at the cemetery all day. Sometimes it looked like being like, you know what, screw this. I don't want to work this week. I'm going on vacation. I had to do what I could to keep living, because, you know, I was 26 years old. I knew that I have, you know, I've got 50, 60 years that I have to live with this grief. And so I needed to figure out how to handle it. And then one of my girlfriends from high school, who I had not spoken to in years, reached out to me on Instagram. You know, she's liked my stuff with Asher every now and then. You know, when he passed away, she sent a nice note, was always praying for us. So, you know, we had kind of stayed in contact, but not really. She sent me a message out of the blue, and she had a little girl that totally unexpectedly was born with Down syndrome and had a pretty significant hole in her heart. So she was getting ready to, you know, live this NICU life with her daughter, and then eventually have to have open heart surgery. And so she just sent me this note, like, how did you do this? How did you handle having a baby and then all of a sudden realizing that your entire life has changed and everything that you planned for just went out the window, and you have no idea how to, you know, cope or even be a person anymore. And so, you know, I chatted with her a lot, and that was kind of like the eye opening for me. Like, I have a story that needs to be told, and there are parents all over this country that need to know that someone has walked in their shoes and survived. And whether that just looks like a sick kid that gets better, or it looks like burying your child too young, people need to know that you get through it. And it's not easy. And there will be days that you're like, why am I still feeling so awful 2 years later? But for however it happens, somewhere deep inside of you, you pull this strength that you didn't even know exists, and you do what you need to for your kid. And even if that means living after him or her, you know, the love of a parent is unlike anything I can, you know, ever explain. You do things for your children that you're like, where did that come from? I didn't even know I had the capacity, you know, to love and care and fear this deeply, but you do. And so yeah, so that was when I was like, all right, like, it's time. I have taken the year to be selfish in my grief and do what I have to do, and now it's time for me to, you know, take after my son and take everything terrible that has happened to me and use it for good.
Well, you know, there's so much there, and I know our audience already now can understand why you're our inaugural guest, and why we snatched you up and said, hey, we want to be able to assist you in sharing this story and taking Asher's memory and the life that he lived, and let's just take it and share it with the world, because that's, you know, he had a purpose here, and I just have so much admiration about how you've navigated this, about the awareness you have at 26 years old to say, hey, I need to create a space for healing and for mourning my son, and you know, giving yourself that permission creates a space for you to heal. And for you to get that at 26 just, it astonishes me. I mean, you're such an old soul, and everything that you're saying speaks right to my mama bear heart. And I know exactly what it feels like to get that infantile spasms diagnosis, and everything that you dreamed just is shattered and it's gone. And yet there's this rising of the phoenix, and the other side of how, because of everything that happened to your little boy and my little girl, we're here, sitting here now in the place to help all these other people on the path behind us. I mean, what an honor that is. I think one thing there's a couple questions I have, but the first one is, when you're speaking about the process, the end of life process. And I remember one of our conversations, you said, there is no pamphlet that tells you how to bury your baby. And that, like, those words, bury your baby, I mean, the worst nightmare, yet you've lived through it. And that's really one of the things that you're going to speak on and write about and vlog about for our audience. Can you speak into that and what that experience was like? I know so many of our families, they don't know where to turn. They haven't found the resources they need. Can you just talk about what worked for you and what you learned?
Yeah, definitely. So when we came to end of life, we worked with a team at the hospital called our complex care team. And they basically, throughout Asher's life, just kind of helped me manage all of his different doctors. They helped us through all of our inpatient stays, just kind of making sure that we were taken care of. So, they were the team that I called and I said, I think it's time that we move over to hospice. I don't want him to die in the hospital. I want him to be at home. And so they were the ones that chose the hospice team for us, which was such a blessing because I don't even know what that Google search looks like. Like, who do I call when my baby is dying? So they chose a hospice team for us. They said, this is who a lot of our kids in the cancer center use, and they've been really great. So I was very fortunate that they kind of set that meeting up. And they met us at the house that day. I was like, okay, do I need to come in to sign a DNR? Because you need a doctor to say like, oh, this mom isn't crazy. Like, her kid's actually dying. And they were like, no, once you make that choice, I'm never going to make you step foot in this hospital again unless you need to. So they had sent a doctor out to our house that day to kind of do his final kind of his final review of Asher's case and kind of give the sign off like, okay, this child is dying and we're ready to move him into hospice. And then our hospice team came and they kind of, walked us through expectations of what that was going to look like. And the one thing that I didn't know, I didn't know anything about hospice, but the one thing that shocked me is it really is up to you. So, they walked me through all of the options that we had. We could have a nurse come as many as 5 times a day if we needed her to, or I could say, I don't want a nurse in my house today. I just want to be with my son today, and I can totally have the nurse not come at all. So they kind of, set that expectation. Like, we're not here to watch you or babysit you. We're here for you when you need us. And then there were other things like, they had music therapy if they wanted someone to come in and play Asher music just to kind of calm him down. We had a social worker who did memory making with us. So, my family was all a part of the conversation. And so, they helped us make bracelets with like Asher's little fingerprint on it. They helped us make a little mold of his hands and feet. So we'd have things to keep. And, they were really wonderful, but like I said, there's no pamphlet on how to bury a baby. And so a lot of things that, we talked about and a lot of things that went through, they're talking about burying your mom or your grandma or, nobody had anything to say to me, to prep me for what it's like to watch a child die. And watching a child die is very different than watching, someone who has been sick for an extended period of time because, as sick as Asher's brain was, he was a healthy 2-year-old. So his end of life was really rough because as his brain was shutting down, his heart was saying, no, we're a healthy 2-year-old. We're not supposed to be dying. So it was rough and, obviously grief looks really ugly sometimes. And they handed me this pamphlet about like the dying process. And it just had nothing to do with what I was going to expect. And I straight up looked at the nurse and was like, this is a really inappropriate thing to give a mother. Like, it just is. I understand that you guys are going through your checklist. Like, this is the book that we have to show you and this is what we have to do. But you need to realize that I am burying a 2-year-old. I am not burying an elderly woman. Not that it's any easier or harder, but it's different. And you can't give me a one-size-fits-all book and say, this is what to expect, because I have never done this before. So I'm clinging to every piece of information like it's the Bible. And that's not what's going to happen. And so I was really frustrated because nobody could walk me through what to expect. And so actually after Asher passed away, and I met with the social worker a couple of times, we had conversations about like, hey, you need to do your research and find better things to give mothers because this, it's not going to work.
That's perspective is so necessary and so powerful. It's this experience, your story is something I hadn't come across, right? And when I first heard it, I was driving when we had our first conference call, and I had to pull over.
Yeah.
I was so devastated for you and so inspired by the strength during that devastation that I literally had to pull over and cry.
Yeah.
But that's what makes your perspective, for families who are listening at home, who have their own challenges and struggles and questions and fears and hopes, even, so important. And I guess I want to ask you, like, if you could give, one piece of advice, right, to that family at home, to that mom, to that dad, who's got a child with, whether it's terminal or, epilepsy in a way that's treatable, but still not, given that quality of life, that a child deserves, really. What would that one piece of advice be, you think?
I guess I would just say, and it's something that I had to have people tell me over and over again when I was in the thick of it, is just keep going. There are going to be days where you're like, it is not possible. I am tired. I am frustrated. I am scared, and I just want to give up. And that usually comes, hopefully, when, the hope is on the horizon. There will be really god-awful, terrible days, but then there will be a lot of days where you're like, okay, we can do this. And even in the death process, there are days where I'm like, oh, not happening today. And then the sun comes up and, or a cardinal flies by my window and I'm like, oh, yep, we can do this. We just have to keep going, one day at a time. And when the days are too long, 1 hour at a time, but just keep going.
I love that. I think we'll see that in a tweet and probably an Instagram post
Yes,
here.
we will.
Just keep going.
I am just so honored that you share your story, that you're so vulnerable and yet so powerful. And I know everybody watching sees what we've seen. And Asher's story gets to live on. And anything that we can do to make that happen, we're there. The last question I want to ask you is, you spoke a lot about praying. And I know for me, when I was going through the process of Mickie being diagnosed with infantile spasms and we went on an 8-month journey to save her life, every day I was praying, God save my daughter, because I knew that she was going to die. And he did. We got connected with the hospital. They found a brain malformation and they removed it. I know if we hadn't gotten to that hospital, that wouldn't have happened. So for you, going through this and having the nightmare happen in many ways, how did it get you through, and how does it play a role in your life now that he's gone, moving on every single day?
Yeah, I struggled a lot with my faith. Obviously, when he was first diagnosed, like I said, I was mad. I didn't understand why this was happening to us when so many people had healthy children. But I knew that there was something bigger that I couldn't see at that time. And I can look back at it now and see, like, of course, Asher was put on this earth to do what he did, and stay for as long as he was here and then leave. And I remember distinctly the day that I was sitting in church, and I didn't even realize that I had done it, but subconsciously my prayers had changed from praying for our miracle and realizing that my miracle wasn't going to come, and instead praying for an easier end of life. And I remember just that it had just subconsciously happened, overnight. And I remember, being shocked as I sat in church, like, oh my God, I cannot just believe that I prayed for my son to die. But he had been struggling for so long that, once we went to end of life, that was, that it was the answer to my prayers, that I was able to keep him at home and then let him go peacefully. And now, I just have to have the faith that he has instilled enough strength and power in me that I can keep doing this for the next 50-something years, before I get to see him again. And I fully do believe that, I will be reunited in perfect healing with him one of these days. And to get to know that he is somewhere that is not here. I have always said Earth is not what was right for Asher. We needed him, but he didn't need us. His body, was not big enough for his soul. And so that's kind of the thing, on the days where I'm like, nope, can't do it anymore. That's what I remember. There, he was the answer to my prayers. I prayed hard for that baby, and I got him. And so maybe my miracle didn't come when Asher was here, but maybe it's still coming. And I have to believe that there's something bigger than being 26 years old and burying your 2-year-old. I've got to believe that there's something bigger out there. So I will keep praying for it, and I will keep, living like my son did, fighting every day to be here for the people who need her here, doing what I was meant to do here, whatever that is, whatever that looks like in my next 50 years, and then being reunited with my baby.
Well, I think maybe it's hard for you to see, but I mean, you're a miracle, and the work you do and how you do it and how you carry yourself and how you honor him and the beautiful life he led in those 2 years. And I mean, that's a miracle in and of itself. And, I know it's hard. I know it's unfathomably hard to even consider, the stuff you've gone through. But as I sit here and experience you, I need you to know, like, what a miracle you are. Thank you. How just feeling your strength and your level of love for him and how that lives on through you is a miracle. Yeah. And as a dad of 3 children who thankfully are healthy, and I almost feel guilty saying that, but it's a reminder to me to squeeze them a little bit harder, right? To love them a little bit more, to be a little bit more forgiving of them doing something that, might cause frustration or whatever. And that, that's huge too, right? We have limited moments, whatever they are, whether it's 2 years or X amount of years, the time is limited. And it's such a reminder to, like you said, just keep going and celebrate each one of those moments with presence, with love, with nurturing, with celebration, with thankfulness. And that's part of your miracle. So I'm so thankful that you joined us and that we are getting to know one another, and that you've become such a powerful advocate in your own right, and that you're using that advocacy to help our audience, understand what they can do to, be the best possible parent they can be in whatever time they have, Yeah.
Thank you. It is such an honor to, get to work with you both, and, bring awareness to things that aren't talked about enough, and need to be more, because we owe it to our kids, and we owe it to the other parents who are going to, walk in shoes similar to ours, to let them know that we can do this.
Well, Mama Bear, you are the definition of faith over fear. Thank you for joining us on our podcast. We honor you. We will continue to honor Asher, and be blessed.
Thank you. Thank you.